The gospel for today may be found on page 1166 in your Bible, page 1166. It's from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, beginning with verse 21, page 1166. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
Peter came and said to Jesus, "Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Jesus said to him, "Not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. As he could not pay, the Lord ordered him to be sold, along with his wife and children and all his possessions, and payment to be made. The slave fell on his knees before him, saying, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything.' And out of pity for him, the Lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii, and seizing him by the throat, he said, 'Pay what you owe.' Then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you.' But he refused. Then he went and threw him into prison until he should pay the debt. When his fellow servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. Then the Lord summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you?' And in anger, the Lord handed him over to be tortured until he should pay the entire debt. So my heavenly Father will also do with every one of you if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Lord, how many times should I forgive my brother or sister? Once is hard enough, right? How many times? There's a story about old Jim. Jim was not feeling well, went to the doctor, received the news that he had a very short time to live. His illness was terminal. Jim began to think about getting his house in order before he left this world. And he knew that he had difficulty. He had a good friend once upon a time, Mike, but they had had a falling out, and it was rather nasty, and they went their separate ways and never talked to one another again. And so Jim called for Mike and said, "Let's settle things up." And it was difficult, but Jim got through it. He apologized for the terrible things he had said and how he had hurt his friend. And he forgave his friend as well. And Mike did the same. And they got through all that, and they were reconciled. They shook hands. But as Mike was leaving, Jim said, "Now, if I don't die, none of this counts." Well, that's kind of how we are, isn't it? It's difficult because when we're hurt, we kind of go into shock, especially someone close to us. Someone we really like or love, that we get hurt and we go into shock. We feel the hurt down deep in our being, and then we get angry often. And sometimes the anger comes out physically. That's usually not very healthy. Somebody's getting hurt, or two people are getting hurt, or more people are getting hurt. Somebody's getting dead sometimes. Or what usually happens more often is we keep it inside. We keep our anger in there, and it just burns our bellies, and it festers and it poisons us. And it gets worse and worse. And we may share it with somebody or other, and we tell about this incident, but we don't talk to the person. And it just becomes gossip. That may help for a little while, but then it comes back again. It just continues to get worse, it seems. Now, so what's the Christian way to deal with anger? Anger happens to all of us. Jesus got angry. Jesus let the scribes and Pharisees really have it because they were oppressing people and they were cheating people and they were just terrible. The leaders of his own people. If you read Matthew 23, that whole chapter, he's really going after them, and other places too. That's kind of a cool anger, although he appears rather hot at the time. It's a cool anger where we figure out how to deal with the injustices. We do that when we work for justice in our community as a parish and as an organization called Cage. We work with cool anger, trying to figure out how to make justice happen. But how do we deal with that in our lives? Now, I think it's important that forgiving is different than being reconciled. Being reconciled is when you're okay again, you're chums again, everything is wonderful again. But there are certain people you can't be reconciled with. If you've been abused by someone, either physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, you can't be reconciled with those people who have abused you. Probably, almost always, you cannot be reconciled because they will assume that means they can return to their former way of life and abuse you some more. What you've done is just enable them. So you can forgive them, however, without them knowing about it. You forgive them in your heart. That can be done, and that is important, and that is, in fact, necessary. Difficult, very difficult, but it can be done. Now let me share with you a personal story. I've told you this before, so if you've heard it before, I'm sorry, but here it is. When I was a kid in grade school, probably about the 6th grade, one day after school, it was a rainy, miserable, nasty day, and a friend of mine down the block had a model train set up in his basement, which is pretty elaborate. And we went down and played with the model trains. And my parents knew where I was. And it was dinner time, and they called and said, supper's ready, and time to come home. Now, I was not known to be particularly punctual. So I don't know how long this took. When you're interested in model trains, time just escapes you. And eventually I came down the alley, I turned the corner there to head to my house, and there was the garage was right there. I turned the corner, and the garage door was open. And there was my dad standing there with a stick in his hand, a switch. He grabbed my arm and pulled me in the garage and started beating on me with the switch. Now, my dad was a good dad. He never did this before. And I didn't know what was going on. I was totally blindsided. I was shocked. I was mad. He was beating on me with a switch. Well, I went inside the home and for dinner, and I told my mother how mad I was, but I didn't tell my dad because he was my dad. And he was big and powerful, I thought. And I had to respect him and all these kinds of things you're supposed to do, but I was really mad. Now, that just settled in my gut somewhere for years. And later, as I grew up and was ordained and started doing what ordained people do, I realized that I was kind of depressed, probably. It wasn't a deep depression, but it was one of those depressions that when there are no highs and there are no lows, you just kind of numb your way through life. Everything is numb. And I said, this isn't right. What could be causing this? As I thought back, that's the only thing I could think of is this incident with my dad. I said, well, maybe that's it. Now, I know that's not a big deal. There are people in this world who are abused terribly, regularly, violently. I understand. But this, I was not abused like that. This little thing just got me. And I said, I guess it was that. And then I said, what do I do with it? Because my dad is dead. And the only thing I knew to do was to pull his pictures so I could see him in my mind and in my heart and talk to him in my heart and say, Dad, I don't understand what happened that day. It must have been a really, really bad day for you. I don't know what happened in your life. I don't understand it at all. It does not seem fair to me. And I'm really angry. And I forgive you. And when I said I forgive you, somehow all that anger melted away. It was like I had a new relationship now with my dad, even though he was in heaven. And my life turned out much better when I could release the anger. And my health got better. Everything's got better. So you can forgive, even though it's very, very difficult. Even somebody who doesn't know they're forgiven, at least not personally. There's another story about C.S. Lewis. He was a Christian writer. And when he was a kid, he was raised in a school where the teacher treated him really viciously and violently. And C.S. Lewis hated that teacher. He hated him for a long time. And C.S. Lewis was an atheist for a while and became a Christian eventually and realized that he must do something with his anger. And he didn't know what to do. And finally one day he said, every day I'm going to say, I forgive you. Every day, I forgive you. I forgive you. And he did that. It didn't seem to make any sense at the time. Didn't seem to have any effect at the time, but eventually he began to realize that things were changing. Something was going on within him. And each time he said, I forgive you, another block in the wall of bitterness was removed until eventually it was gone. I forgive you. Difficult, but possible. And in fact necessary, because anger just hurts us. The person we're angry at probably doesn't even know it. But it hurts us. And it is in our own best interest to get rid of it. Let me read you a little thing that was in Reader's Digest a while back. It invited people to respond to a question, or to finish the sentence, I never regret. Here's how some people answered that. I never regret the day I quit smoking. I never regret taking naps and leaving large tips. I never regret serving my country. I never regret eating the last cookie. And then there was this one. I never regret forgiving the person who caused me pain, which gave me relief I never thought I could have. I never forget forgiving the person who caused me pain, which gave me relief I never thought I could have. Let's just take a few moments to meditate and ask yourself, who should you forgive?